Larry, we've got a very important session of the Citizens Grand Jury today. We're going to be talking about the tyranny that's overtaken the Biden-Harris Justice Department. How are you today, Larry?
Doing fine, like I always say, as well as can be expected under communism.
Exactly. And I think
Let me
before we begin,
pick it
Larry,
up, Jason, from where we left off last week. We, of course, were presenting evidence and information with regard to federal judges of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, who have been rubber stamping the actions and doing worse than that of the Biden-Harris Justice Department, which has been turned into a Gestapo with regard to January 6th. We will be continuing with that because there are quite a few judges that are deserving of an indictment. We will seek their indictment. We will try them early next year. We will seek sentences and we'll seek to meet those sentences out. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. We know that the great majority of these judges, I can't think of an exception, frankly, in the most corrupt court in the country, which is the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. It fits with the rest of the swamp, frankly, swamp creatures basically inhabiting the courthouse over there, is that even peaceful protesters have been put in prison pending trial without bail. Some of them were put in prison because they watched video of Mike Lindell's conference on election fraud. Some were put in prison because they wore T-shirts in favor of Trump. Judges actually referred to this. Some were put in prison even though they never threatened any judges. One judge, Reggie Walton, claims that the judges are getting threats, but the people that he gave a heavy sentence to didn't make any threats. And now there's this judge, Christopher Cooper, who I've encountered in my own litigation. And Christopher Cooper, African American, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. It has nothing to do with him being African American or not. There are plenty of white ones over there that are dumber than a rock. But he threw somebody in prison, a woman who simply bragged that because she's white and had blonde hair, she didn't think she'd go to prison. Okay, now if we can have black pride, we can have white pride. And it was a dumb thing to say, but that's not a reason to throw her in prison for 60 days where she could very well be raped or killed in one of these prisons, particularly since the judge has now whipped up racial hatred against her. So this is what you're dealing with. And we will be presenting information next week about Judge Christopher Cooper, federal judge, U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia as well. In my new book, which is called It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America, which significantly adds to my prior book, which is It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. I hope that you'll buy both of them because you'll see the evolution of what's happened just in 1 year. I think you need to read both of them. There are different things in the different books, but this second one is getting into what has been occurring during the Biden-Harris administration and also getting into Republican impotence. I mean, we have a neutered elephant that sits there and plays political games trying to capitalize on this country burning. And you can see that, today. It's Veterans Day, and we honor our fallen heroes. But here's the cold, dirty truth, is that Republican leaders knew what was going to happen in Afghanistan. They got national security briefings. They knew that when Biden ordered all the troops out, and that's been confirmed with the military brass, excuse me, that everything was going to collapse and that it would turn into a terrorist haven. And they knew that our troops would be at risk. So 13 died. And when those 13 died, Biden and Harris had to look tough. So they ordered a drone strike, not knowing what they were actually striking. And they wound up killing 7 children and other innocent Afghans who were simply social workers. I don't care whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim or whatever. You don't do that kind of thing. And the president needs to be held accountable for that. So here we are on Veterans Day, and we will be trying Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and James Biden for the massive bribery from China, Ukraine, and Russia. We will be trying Joe Biden for negligent homicide, manslaughter, and treason. And that trial will take place in January. We already have a judge. And that judge will also handle these other prosecutions that are coming down the line. And this particular individual who's going to be a judge has himself suffered at the hands of federal judges in the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia. He won't handle the one that, he won't preside over the case involving the one that harmed him, but he certainly understands the issues here of what needs to be decided by a jury of their peers. So the latest outrage, in addition to these judges who are rubber stamping what's going on at the Biden-Harris Gestapo, otherwise known as the Department of Injustice, is what recently occurred to James O'Keefe, the head of Project Veritas. James O'Keefe experienced a similar situation to our client Siaka Massaquoi, who I've talked about before. Dozens of FBI agents raiding his home, taking a diary, apparently, of a member of the Biden family, which obviously has stuff in it which Biden doesn't want out, seizing it and not giving him his constitutional rights. And God knows what's going to happen in the future. Obviously, the Biden-Harris Justice Department and the Justice Department in general never did this with regard to the New York Times or any other publications when they receive information over the transom, which they then publish. But I want to play it. As much as I hate to do it, it's an interview by Sean Hannity, who I don't hold a high regard for, as you may know. But for once, he actually had an interview that means something. For once, we heard more than just Democrats say we're throwing Granny over the cliff. So let's play it, Jason, and we'll comment on that. And this will be part of the indictment of Attorney General Merrick Garland, and also the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, for abusing their office and persecuting people for political purposes and using the FBI as a Gestapo against the American people.
And tonight, a major developing story after the FBI raided the home of Project Veritas CEO and founder James O'Keefe, along with other Project Veritas journalists, as part of an investigation into a diary believed to have been written by Joe Biden's daughter, Ashley. Now, according to O'Keefe, within an hour of the first raid last week, the New York Times reached out for comment. Now, how did the Times know about the search warrant so quickly? I don't know. It's just one of many unanswered questions. Kind of sounds like that pre-dawn raid on Roger Stone. Fake news CNN cameras just happened to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, here to explain more, his first interview. He is the CEO and founder of Project Veritas, James O'Keefe, along with his attorney, Paul Klayman, is with us. Welcome, both of you. James, I think it's important to establish other media. And I'm not comparing you to other media, but other media use undercover cameras and have for many, many years, like even 60 Minutes and NBC's To Catch a Predator, right? That this is not a new form of journalism. You acknowledge that?
Well, Sean, on Saturday morning, I acknowledge that, but I woke up to a pre-dawn raid, banging on my door. I went to the door to answer the door, and there were 10 FBI agents with a battering ram, white blinding lights. They turned me around, handcuffed me, and threw me against the hallway. I was partially clothed in front of my neighbors. They confiscated my phone. They raided my apartment. On my phone were many of my reporters' notes, a lot of my sources unrelated to this story, and a lot of confidential donor information to our news organization, Sean. So I've heard the phrase, the process is the punishment. I didn't really understand what that meant until this weekend. And Sean, I wouldn't wish this on any journalist.
Let me go into the issue. Like anybody that works in any form of journalism or in the press in any capacity, whether you're a talk show host like me or doing what you do or doing what anybody else does. In the course of doing your work, you have sources, correct? You have whistleblowers. You have people giving you tips all the time. To what extent can you tell us the context under which you were given this diary? I assume you did not take the diary yourself. Did you not? Is that correct?
That's correct. I'll speak to that, Sean, if I can. An anonymous source contacted Project Veritas and indicated the source had in its lawful possession a copy of the diary that the source said belonged to Ashley Biden. Project Veritas had no prior contact with the source. The source had a lawyer. The lawyer engaged in negotiations with Veritas's in-house counsel in the resulting written agreement, like so many news organizations do. Veritas, the source again affirmed that it had lawful possession of the source material. In exchange for that, Veritas agreed to pay money for the right to publish the material. As you know, Sean, Veritas never did. It killed the story on the newsroom floor. It went a step further, and it turned the material into local law enforcement. The actions of President Biden's Department of Justice in this case are unprecedented because there's decades of Supreme Court precedent.
James, I've known you for a long time. You had no direct knowledge that what this source was giving you could in any way have been stolen. You were not able to corroborate the authenticity of the diary, and you never ran it. At what point, then, did you go to law enforcement on your own, unsolicited, and tell them that you had this in your possession and it might be somebody else's?
Well, Sean, I mean, we get sources come to us all the time. We have thousands of sources come to Project Veritas. The routine nature of journalism to be shown information from a variety of sources. But this is an attack on the First Amendment by the Department of Justice. We didn't publish the story. We couldn't authenticate the story, so our journalists looked into it. We did not publish the story because we could not authenticate it.
Which, by the way, if you can't authenticate it, then you did the right thing. At what point did you feel a need to bring this to law enforcement? At what point in the process did that happen?
After the decision was made to kill the story and not run it. I got to add one thing, if I could, Sean. You use the S word. It's really important to understand, not to buy the premise that the diary's stolen. Nobody.
Well, that was my next question.
If that's the case,
I have been reading all over the internet, everywhere in between, that she claims it was stolen, but other people claim it might have been left in a former place of residence of hers. Do we have an answer to that question?
We do, but I think people might look at me and say that I'm crazy for talking about the facts at the level I have already, and so I'm going to respectfully say that's going to come out. It's going to be awfully favorable to James and awfully favorable to his news organization.
Well, I think it's awfully interesting that James is the one that brought it to law enforcement's attention. Let me ask this question. What is the alleged crime that they have here?
I don't know. This was
they didn't tell you?
Turned in a year ago. Well, the search warrant has misprison of a felony, accessory after the fact, and transporting material across state lines as the basis for raiding the home of a journalist and seizing his work papers and journalist notes.
I would assume both of you are pretty familiar with Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers case and the New York Times obtaining stolen top secret documents that they were publishing. They actually set a precedent in the U.S. Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision that said they had the right to publish it, even though that was stolen material. Do you see similarities?
Not only the right to publish, the right to, it's entirely similar. There's no exception to Mr. O'Keefe and Project Veritas. The right to take the material knowing it was stolen, the right to seek comment, the right to investigate, and ultimately the right to publish. This is outrageous and unprecedented. And journalists everywhere on either side.
Why, if you went to authorities a year ago, if I'm understanding you correctly, why did this come up now? James?
Listen, James, go ahead. I'm sorry, Sean.
I don't know the answer to that, Sean, but this is, they've crossed the bridge here. If they can do this to me, these are about certain principles that are so fundamental, our First Amendment in this country. I'm calling upon all journalists to take a stand against this. A source comes to us with information. I don't even decide to publish it. If they can do this to me, if they can do this to this journalist and raid my home and take my reporter notes, they'll do it to any journalist. This is about something very fundamental in this country. I don't know what direction this country is going in, but journalists everywhere have to rise up because we broke no laws here. They could do it to me. They'll do it to anybody.
So when they came to your house in this pre-dawn raid and they threw handcuffs on you and pulled you out of your house and 10 agents go inside, I assume they took items out of your house and office, as I understand it. At that point, did they just take the handcuffs off and say, see you later?
They spent about over 2 hours in my apartment, and they confiscated 2 of my iPhones. And again, these phones contained a lot of source information and reporter notes on them. These are serious First Amendment issues and donor information to our news foundation. So yeah, it's troubling. I asked to speak with my attorney a few times. They allowed me to do that, but I was kind of in a state of shock, frankly. I can't believe this is happening.
What? Let me go back. I'm trying to understand this. So a year prior, you go to law enforcement on your own. That you have a source, gives you information, you don't know where it came from, you try to corroborate it, you're unable to do so, issues arise as to where this might have come from. You, on your own a year prior, go to law enforcement. Did you hand over to them at the time this diary? And did you have any indication where the diary came from? James?
Came from the source, Sean, as I said.
The source gave us the information, and we didn't know if it was stolen or not. We don't know that.
I would assume that.
But journalists throughout the 20th century have been given information. You know, the Washington Post and the New York Times are given information inside all manner of institutions, and they're protected by the Supreme Court of the United States to publish that information that a source gives to them. So there's no distinction between.
Did they ask you for the name of the source? Are you going to protect that source?
Well, insofar as they have my reporter's notes on the phone they confiscated from the pre-dawn raid, they have access to the contents of my iPhone, which is deeply troubling and should outrage the ACLU and any other journalist in the United States. They have access to
James. They don't
all
care.
of the contents from my phone.
Believe me,
Look, I sent him a letter.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Paul.
Sorry. I sent him a
I'll
letter.
give you the last word.
I sent him a letter. I let him know that I represent James, and in the normal course, the material on the phone that they're entitled to have would have been produced promptly. It's the other material on there that is deeply troubling. This is the First Amendment. It's an assault.
Would this, on a scale of 1 to 10, how damaging, if this turned out to be true, you haven't been able to authenticate it, if it turned out to be true, how damaging would this be to the president and his family? James?
Look, you know the answer to that?
Well, I mean, I think I couldn't authenticate the source material. I had a newsroom at the time. We were looking through it for a little while. We couldn't authenticate it, so I decided not to run it. And I'm trying to figure out what more we could have done as journalists. What more could I have done but not run the story and hand it over to law enforcement? I don't know what more we could have done, and so we decided not to publish the story. So what on earth, what action could we have taken as reporters beyond the action that we've taken?
You're raising a great question.
And decide not to publish.
And why did it take a year? All right, we're going to continue to follow the story. James O'Keefe, thank you. Paul, thank you for being with us.
There you go, Larry.
Jason, this is a very puzzling interview in many ways. Obviously, James O'Keefe, they put him on TV, but for reasons similar to Kyle Rittenhouse, he didn't take the fifth, but he didn't really want to answer any questions. I mean, and I understand that, and that's appropriate. His lawyer is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. That's obvious, and he better get himself another lawyer quickly. But here's the basic point that Hannity didn't pick up on. Hannity's not the sharpest knife either, as you know, is that would the Biden-Harris Justice Department have gone to the effort of sending tens of FBI agents into the home of James O'Keefe with a battering ram, cuffing him, throwing him up against the wall, confiscating all of his property, And by the way, the lawyer, this is why I say is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He just conceded that the FBI was entitled to some information on that cell phone. I would say they were entitled to none of it. It's an illegal search and seizure.
Yeah.
But you got to ask this question, as I always say. Do you think Biden, Harris, and their Justice Department would stick their neck out to this degree if there wasn't something in that diary of his daughter that wasn't incriminating or something that they didn't want out? So that pretty much validates, just from a common sense perspective, that is the diary of Biden's daughter.
Let me ask you this, Larry.
As O'Keefe said over and over again, this is the way journalists get information. It's not necessarily right. It's not necessarily ethical, but that's the way it works, and that's the law. And, so they went beyond that, and they violated his Fourth Amendment rights, at least, as well as rights of the First Amendment.
Well, that's what I wanted to bring up. They spoke quite a bit about the First Amendment, but I don't think they said enough about the violation of the Fourth Amendment, which, if I'm correct, speaks to your assertion that they had no right to any of that information. They can't just bust into your house for no reason, take your cell phone and say, well, we have a right to look at some of this. I would have loved to see them talk more about all of our rights to be secure in our persons, our homes, our papers, beyond journalists. This means the FBI can come to anybody's house, throw them up against the wall. And by the way, Larry, once battering rams and armed people are in your house, doesn't that introduce the possibility that something unexpected could happen, resulting in severe injury or death? I mean, this is hugely dangerous.
It's a bigger, you remember Ruby Ridge and Waco? I mean, that's another, example of how tragedies can happen in a very broad scale. That was during the Clinton Justice Department. And you might remember, it makes reference to Roger Stone. Obviously, I'm not terribly sympathetic as to what happened to Roger Stone because, I've had dealings with Roger Stone myself. He's not a favorite person, to say the least.
Not your favorite guy.
But the fact is that he was convicted on lying to the government with 7 counts, five counts for lying, 1 for threatening witnesses, 1 for obstruction of justice. And, there may come a point in time. Roger also brags about, the mafia came up in his trial, this and that. I'm not saying he is mafia, but he obviously, at a minimum, is an admirer. So there was a reason for all those FBI agents, in my view, to go into the house. They don't know, where he's coming from all of his braggadocio. But this guy O'Keefe, clearly, he was no threat to anyone, and they could have asked him to simply turn it over. But they had to make a big show because that's intended to have a chilling effect, to put it mildly, on other people who are critical of this administration, the Biden-Harris regime, as we call it. And they wanted to send a message to the world that, we'll act like the German Stasi, the East German Stasi, or the KGB in the former Soviet Union. And now, of course, it's the FBI in our own country. And this is why, we do need to declare independence. When you have a justice system which is corrupt as what we've got, and you got a Department of Justice who's used as the private Gestapo of the left and of Biden and Harris, this is a very, very dangerous situation, extremely dangerous. And I know going around, with people in ordinary walks of life, I just took something to Federal Express and, I like to test people, and I asked her when the package was going to get there. And she says, well, they're not really being delivered on time anymore at Federal Express. What? Charged me $89 for a delivery. And because I took the super fast route, which is still later than it would have been otherwise. And I just made a little comment. I said, that's what you get when, you pump all this money into the economy. Nobody wants to work. And Biden's responsible for that. She looks at me, like she's seen a deer in the headlights, like I don't want to comment on that, it cost me my job, whatever the case may be. And this is the way people are right now. So they're seeing these signals that are being sent out by the Justice Department to terrorize them. And you saw that, it's going on in real time right now with Kyle Rittenhouse, who clearly it was self-defense. Guy had the kid that he killed, had a gun in his face. And they prosecute him regardless. They put him through the ringer. The kid will never be the same again. And then you have the so-called president of the United States branding him as a white domestic terrorist, a white supremacist. He'll be lucky even if he's acquitted, if he isn't shot at and possibly killed. I know from my former client, George Zimmerman, who I represented for a period of time, that somebody shot at him after he was acquitted, almost at point blank range. Luckily, they missed in a car. This kid's branded. He won't be able to walk through the streets for the rest of his life, particularly if he lives in Minnesota. So,
Larry, if I could just comment on
this is what
that
they
for a
do.
moment.
They want to subjugate the American people to this tyranny. And that's why the title of the show is Tyranny of the Biden-Harris Justice Department.
I don't know if you had a chance to see Kyle Rittenhouse's testimony, but I was very impressed. I mean, he's only 18 right now, and his composure on the stand, where he might face a really long time in prison, is remarkable for anyone of any age. But when he began to speak about the moments leading up to the incident where he did use deadly force to defend himself, he became very emotional and started to cry, which to me indicated that this is a normal person who is incredibly conflicted over his need to take another person's life. I mean, he started crying uncontrollably. This is the demeanor of a person who's reliving an incredibly traumatic incident, not some murderer who's a white supremacist who's out there to kill people.
Well, that's right. But, and also remember, again, it's Veterans Day. And there are statistics that came out in the last few days that after the debacle in Afghanistan, after the death of the American soldiers, the death of the innocent 7 children and others, that the rate of suicide of American servicemen has markedly increased. Before that, it was about 22 servicemen a day who served in Afghanistan and Iraq that were committing suicide daily. Okay. Now, these are warriors, but you don't think that they have a conscience, that they know now that they've killed all these people, and they didn't do it wrongfully for the most part. They did it, in the interest of the United States. But when you kill a human being, whatever the case may be, you've got to take it to heart. It's very difficult to digest, even if you're doing it in self-defense, even if they're a radical Muslim. I mean, because these Muslims have kids and everything else. So these are human beings. And I think that Rittenhouse's lawyers, I'm watching some of the commentary. I've actually agreed with almost none of it in terms of the total assessment here. Let me tell you the way it works, Larry Klayman style, is that I thought the defense was very smart in putting Rittenhouse on the stand, even though it's a risk, because he has been branded as a white nationalist, racist, domestic terrorist by the President of the United States. He had to show his personality, had to show his inner self. That was very important for the jury, because you've got a jury up there in Minnesota, which is a lynching jury. And that then plays into the judge. Okay, now the judge may be very coy and he may be very smart here, but after what the prosecution did in violating Rittenhouse's Fifth Amendment rights, the judge should have at that point called a mistrial, should have gone no further, and he should have dismissed it with prejudice. But I think what this judge is doing to cover his own, excuse the language, ass, is that he wants the jury to get him off the hook. And he's hoping the jury will acquit Kyle Rittenhouse. That way, he won't be blamed for letting a, quote, white domestic supremacist off the hook. Now, the judge still has the ability, even after a jury verdict, to set aside the verdict, notwithstanding, set aside the verdict, okay, JNOV, judgment notwithstanding the verdict. He can still do that. So I think he's hanging back and to see if the jury will let him off the hook, because frankly, this judge is at risk himself. I mean, he made some courageous comments yesterday, and believe me, that's going to cost him in that community, with that violent, radical Black community out there, Muslims, everything else, that are going to hate his guts. So this has not been discussed because he can't say things like that on Fox News or elsewhere. No, but I'm telling you, this is the fact of life. This judge is playing politics too, because if he was playing it straight, this trial would already be over.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think it's Wisconsin, isn't it? Or are they having it somewhere else?
Maybe it is Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin.
Maybe they move the venue.
It's an interesting case. I want to take you back for just a minute.
You're right. Same thing.
I want to take you back for just a minute to the James O'Keefe situation, because I agree with you that this aggressive move by the FBI is a strong indication that there could be some evidence that's damaging to the president. But I want you to consider this possibility. We've now seen a lot of evidence that there were FBI informants. It's even in evidentiary documents that have been presented, FBI informants and various people who are being protected on the ground on January 6th, FBI plants perhaps. Isn't it possible, Larry, that someone would pose as a source to bring something to James O'Keefe to try to bait him into taking it, and now a year later, the FBI on this maybe rigged up allegation comes and intimidates him just to make anybody who's considering doing what Project Veritas does, this type of muckraker journalism where you really get in the face of the powerful, maybe they're just trying to generally chill that.
No, I think that's a good possibility, Jason. I think you're probably right. Whether it's people like yours truly, where bar associations are trying to eliminate conservative lawyers like me, Kellyanne Conway, Bill Barr, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Rudy Giuliani, or the Justice Department itself. These are what they're doing. They're trying to eliminate any opposition. And, James O'Keefe and Project Veritas has done some very good work. And he gores the ox. They want him gone. And, short of killing him, which is a possibility too, this is a way to try to take him out. So, yeah, I think it may have been a setup.
Yeah.
Possibly.
I think they don't want to kill someone as high profile as James O'Keefe because it would only serve to make him a martyr. It's far more strategic from the point of view of his enemies to make him appear to be dishonest in the public view so that anything that he's said can be called into question. I think they want him to stay alive so they can smear him for the rest of his life.
I'm still not convinced that Andrew Breitbart dropped over after having a few drinks at a local bar in Los Angeles. I'm not. And I was working with Andrew at the time. I think somebody poisoned him. I really do. And
Wow.
There are various ways that you can do it. I mean, look, 80 people died in and around the Clinton administration. It wasn't all by law of average that 80 people died, material witnesses. People died. Jeffrey Epstein died. No one believes that was a suicide. It was covered up. And, so this stuff does happen. But short of doing that, yeah, you set the guy up, you discredit him, and you prosecute him. And what's scary is that who knows what they seized is going to be what they're actually going to claim that they got.
Right.
Maybe they manufacture something that suggests that O'Keefe committed a crime. And I mean, this lawyer, he seems well-intentioned, but man, he's far from the sharpest knife in the drawer. James better get himself a better lawyer at this point.
Yeah. And sorry to jump around, Larry, but back on the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, what you were referring to as far as violating his Fifth Amendment rights, I saw a segment of the trial where the prosecutor made a point out of Rittenhouse choosing to remain silent when the police first approached him after the incident, and the judge cleared out the jury and got very angry that the prosecutor even brought this up because the judge said that it's been the basis of law for 40 or 50 years, but I thought the right to remain silent, hasn't that been around a lot longer than 40 or 50 years?
I caught that too. That's in the Constitution, so that goes back to 1789.
What was the judge talking about?
That goes back to 1789. So it's a lot more than 50 years. This judge was doing what he had to do. He was letting off steam, but in the end, like I said, he wants the jury to take him off the hook, okay? Because if he throws the case out, his life's in danger too, in that community.
I also observed that the judge really kind of wound up to yell at the prosecutor, but then he made a factual error that gave the prosecutor an upper hand in the argument, and it kind of made the judge look a little bit silly. So I appreciate where he's coming from because he does seem to be fair-minded in terms of the facts, but it's interesting to observe how these judges selectively express outrage, and when he got jammed up in projecting the outrage, it really just made him look foolish.
Well, the judge was protecting himself, okay? Because how could any judge sit there and listen to someone blatantly violating Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination? So he was protecting himself. It's very similar to Judge Gloria Navarro, who ultimately was forced to dismiss with prejudice the indictment against my client, Klayman Bundy, his sons, and 16 or so other defendants. She had violated the constitutional rights of my client and the others, the peaceful protesters at Bunkerville, over and over again, to the point that the mainstream newspaper, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, said the prosecutors have a friend in Gloria Navarro. And when it came out during trial that not just the FBI, not just the Bureau of Land Management had lied under oath, but also that the prosecutors themselves had lied under oath, or not under oath, but had lied to the court about sharpshooters, going around and encircling my client's ranch and things like that, she had to dismiss the case to save her own skin. At that point, she was totally disgraced. So yes, she did it for herself. She didn't do it for the Bundy. She hates the Bundy's guts, and she hates my guts, and she hated everybody else's guts that was associated with the Bundys. In my case, since Sheriff Joe Arpaio is my friend and my client, she went to law school in Maricopa County, so that may have played a role too. Who knows? That's the county that Sheriff Arpaio was the sheriff for decades. So all these factors enter into it. And, you got to imagine, if you're Kyle Rittenhouse, how frightened you must be sitting there on the stand when basically people want to lynch you because you're white. That's the bottom line.
Well, and I'm sure you saw everybody's favorite moron, Jeffrey Toobin, weigh in saying that Kyle Rittenhouse is lucky that he's not on trial for being an idiot. I think, Larry, if it were a crime to be an idiot, Jeffrey Toobin would be on death row right now.
Well, I was going to say, anybody that gets caught masturbating on Zoom is beyond an idiot, okay?
Yeah. I'm
At least turn the Zoom off. Right.
Right. I'm surprised CNN brought him back after that. But
I mean, if you're that hard up, frankly, and sick, at least be smart enough to turn the Zoom off. So
right.
Talk about idiots,
So we don't have an indictment prepared for today, Larry, but we wanted to start presenting this information to the citizens' grand jury because, as you've said many times, this is an ongoing effort. We're revisiting each week to try to address the injustice in the Justice Department and the various other serious deficiencies.
Well, we're preparing
government.
it, Jason, and you can see our previous indictments were extremely detailed. They were very well done. And like I said, we do have a judge. We're going to choose a venue. We have served Biden with his indictments already at the White House. We sought to serve him at his home, but it was sent back. And consequently, he now has to, Biden and James Biden and Hunter Biden, we're giving them a right to plead on December 15th. They can plead not guilty. They can plead guilty. They can plead nolo contendere. If they don't show up, of course, they won't plead guilty. We'll enter a not guilty plea for them. And they're going to have an opportunity to come and send lawyers and present evidence. It's going to be a neutral jury of their peers. It's going to be a fair jury. And I believe the evidence is overwhelming, and I believe we will get convictions for the massive bribery scheme, the treason with China, Ukraine, and Russia, and also with regard to negligent homicide and manslaughter and treason in Afghanistan. And when that happens, and this is Veterans Day, remember, I believe the military, whose ox has been gored, they've been disgraced, they've been defiled, they've been dishonored, they have been hung out to dry politically for the purposes of Biden and Harris and others, not just them, but those who preceded them, George W. Bush included, frankly, that I believe they will enforce the judgments. I also believe, frankly, and I'm not advocating this, I believe that Biden is very close to a coup d'etat. I believe that given what's going on with the economy, collapsing economy, given the fact that, with the immigration running across the border, sick people, drug traffickers, human traffickers, given everything that's going on in this country, COVID-19 mandates, I wouldn't be surprised to see the military go to the White House and tell them his time is up. I really wouldn't. I mean, that sounds extreme for this country, but we've never been in a situation like this before. It's never been this bad in this country. And I have some people that I know tell me, Larry, just go off into the horizon, retire, forget about it. You can't do anything. Let the Republicans do it. Fact is, the fact that the Republicans haven't done anything to date is why we have Biden and Harris. If they had actually been a party that represented the interests of conservatives, libertarians, people of faith, and those who believe in the vision of our founding fathers, we wouldn't have these despots in office right now, and we wouldn't have these hack judges on the federal bench in particular. They've done nothing about when they controlled the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives. I went to visit them on a number of occasions. I told them, you've got to start impeachment proceedings or at least an investigation with regard to these judges. I write about it in my book. It takes a revolution. I was told by Steve King at the time, forget it. Bob Goodlatte will not look into it, nor will anybody else on my committee. And why? because it's all part of the same club. It's part of the establishment. And there, by the grace of God, go thee. They're not going to go after judges that someday they may have a case in front of concerning them. So this is where we are. We have no justice system. We've been left defenseless. You can see it, not just with judges in the courts, the federal judges, the Supreme Court justices who threw their own president that put them on the bench under the bus, Coney Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch, despicable. Even Clarence Thomas, who I had respect for, who, frankly, he's at least got a smidgen of integrity up there. He didn't have the guts either. And this is where we are right now. And so they're left defenseless. And James O'Keefe is just the latest victim. There will be more over and over again. And the American people are saying to themselves, I'm scared. I don't want to stick my neck out. But if that's the way our founding fathers had been, we wouldn't have a country right now. They risked their lives, their fortunes, and pledged their sacred honor to form the greatest nation on earth. And to do so, they invoked the divine providence of the Father and the Son. And beyond all odds, they won. But if we don't do it, and as I've said before, is that you think God is just sitting around watching what goes on? Do you think that killing hundreds of millions of babies goes unnoticed by God? Do you think that teaching homosexuality, transgenderism in the schools and teaching kids that it's cool, when they can get a sex operation for free if they want to become one, even if they haven't thought about it before, that it's neat? Do you think that God is looking the other way? No, I don't think so. And do you think he's looking at the other way on the general degradation of our ethics and morality in this country, where lying is a way of life, lying and cheating and stealing? I don't think so. If you believe in God, then I believe that what we're going through right now is a warning from God, that either we shape up or he's going to make sure we ship out. And it's time that we rise up. If you care about your kids and grandkids and future generations, you can't sit there and be entertained by cable news. You better get up off the couch, get to work, and do something, whether it's joining Freedom Watch's Justice League or sitting on a citizens' grand jury or participating in our Third Continental Congresses to declare independence and form a new government, not a new nation, but a new government, or whether it's doing something in the health area or some other area of society. If you just think you should ride off into retirement and say, hey, I'm going to cash in because I worked hard my whole life, then you don't care about your kids and grandkids and future generations at all. And further, for the younger generation and the middle-aged generation, we're dangerously close to not having the nation right now. These people that are running this country are not only evil, but they're despotic. Now, yesterday, I happened to watch, and maybe we can play it, some other citizens' grand jury. I was very impressed by Tulsi Gabbard, who did an interview on Fox. I turn it on in the morning. Very articulate. This is a Democrat. I think she's probably the most articulate person out there. I want people to watch it. I'll put it up on our website because she's saying exactly what I'm saying as a Democrat. And she's sticking her neck out because the Democrats will try to lop her head off, believe me. So this is what we've got to do. We need courageous people. And we need a new government. People like Tulsi Gabbard, people like Sarah Palin, people like Michelle Bachmann, people like Alan Keyes, people like, possibly my friend Bob Barr. He's a little establishment, but I love Bob anyway. We need people there who are not afraid, who have taken the heat, who they've tried to destroy, but did not succeed, who know how corrupt not just the opposite side is, but how corrupt the people that are supposed to be supporting them are, how they get stabbed in the back. Who knows that better than former President Donald Trump? The problem with Trump is that he won't be president again and he won't run, because the minute he announces, he will be indicted by rabid leftist Democrats in New York City and in District of Columbia, and he'll have a hard enough time just trying to keep him and his family out of jail. This is where we are today. What you saw with James O'Keefe will be done with Donald Trump, but even worse. So it's time for the American people to rise up. It's time for us to form a new government, to remove the immunity from federal judges, to remove the immunity from government officials, to come up with a system of selecting counselors and judges, as God says in the old book of Isaiah, who return the tarnished city to the faithful city, who are honest, who aren't sliming around like snakes on the bench because they're bought and paid for by special interests. And I've been a lawyer 45 years. I pay the price for saying this stuff. I've sued judges. I sued every member of the DC Circuit and several in the district court in Washington, DC, over my own matters. And, you have to do what you have to do. And I try to do it peacefully and legally, but they're not above the law. They need to be held accountable, Jason. You've had your own issues. And you can see the tyranny on the federal bench, which is destroying this country. They're the biggest threat to the American people because they're there to protect us from the tyranny of the other two branches of government and ourselves. And as Thomas Jefferson said, unelected, unaccountable to the people, they would become despots and tyrants, causing us to shed the blood of patriots and tyrants yet again every 20 years or so, adding what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty. Jefferson did not want to see anybody dead or hurt. Neither do I, neither do you. But unless we put our foot down now, we're headed to a bloody revolution, which we want to try to avoid. I don't want to see that. So that's my message for today. And that's why these citizens' grand juries are important. It's why we need to hold people accountable. And it's why we need to declare independence and form a new government. And I believe that the American people are ready to do it. Leave the criminals in Washington and both political parties there. Have fun, boys and girls. Commit crimes against each other. We're out of here. We're moving on. Whether you bring back the government to Independence Hall or put it someplace else, get it out of that swamp. It's cancerous, and let it sink by its own weight. That's my message for today. We'll be back next week with another edition of our citizens' grand juries with written indictments.
Very quickly before we go, Larry, I just want to bring a few things to your attention. And with regard to what you just mentioned, I haven't been speaking very much about the lawsuits that I'm involved with, but there are a couple of documents that have showed up on the public docket over the past few days, which I may discuss in the future.
Well, let's not do it on this show.
No, Jason. We're not going to discuss it now. But the Prince of Southern California agrees with your prediction of a coup. He told Osama bin Dorsey, oh, look at that in the video that's 3 minutes and 13 seconds long, that he predicted a coup. I don't know why he would call Jack Dorsey to tell him of a prediction of a coup, but I don't necessarily trust this British royal guy. And the other thing is, the most brazen, well, not the most brazen, but one of the most brazen of the Biden family was back in New York City just yesterday for his art opening. The first son, Hunter Biden, act like a full-fledged member of the New York art scene. Wednesday, he showed up at the George Berger Gallery, where the windows were covered and outside observers were not allowed to see who's in there. We could see George Berger right here. I tried to speak to him on the streets of New York just the other day, and he ran away.
Is that the guy on the right?
Yeah.
Looks like Harpo Marx.
Well, that's generous of you. He looks like a lot of things, but we see Hunter Biden doesn't seem much worse for the wear with all the crack and everything.
That's cute. Vincent Van Gogh. This is a story that has not been written yet, but I said it last time, is that the artwork I thought was actually pretty good. It's clear that Hunter Biden is committing multiple frauds because there's no way that he painted those pictures. No way.
Right. Well, they still let him drive around in a bulletproof Cadillac, so he is the first son, and we're here conducting citizens' grand juries to hold these individuals to account. I want to make sure that our viewers know, Larry, that they can support the citizens' grand juries and the other efforts that you and your team over there at Freedom Watch are working on by going to freedomwatchusa.org, and you can tap on the donate button, make your choice, a financial contribution that suits you. They're all tax deductible, and anything over $50, you're going to get a copy of Larry's book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. It's an important book for people to read, and it's a good precursor to Larry's forthcoming book, so make sure you get that. People can also support this channel by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, becoming a sponsor. You can enjoy a large library of sponsor-exclusive content and new shows every week. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Let me mention one other thing.
Last word for you, Larry.
We have a few minutes. You see that the book has 4.5 stars, 134 ratings. It came out last year, October 27th, before the election. I predicted what was going to happen. And, I tried to point out to the American people that as much as, we love Donald Trump, he's not he's not our Messiah. Okay, we have to do it for ourselves. And that's very important. And the difference between my book and Mark Levin's book, and I bought Mark Levin's book and I read it, is that Mark didn't tell me anything that we don't already know. I mean, we know this country's been taken over by Marxists. Our own people, the Jewish people, there's a faction of them, the Jewish left, they're Marxians, they're disciples of Marx. They're not really Jews at all because they don't believe in God, frankly, most of them. Most of them appear on CNN and MSNBC and other places. But, you know, what I want to point out is that my book actually, and it's not my book, it's my ideas, I'm trying to give real concrete solutions, whether it's citizens' grand juries or third continental congresses, you know, how we fine tune the Constitution. Marx simply says, let's protest and boycott. That's not enough. And if we're going to do that, our country's going to be lost. So I hope people will read my book, read Mark's book, that's good, read it, but also read mine, because I give you concrete solutions and what we can do in a proactive way rather than just boycotting and protesting. Right now, we're way beyond that.
Sorry, Larry, one more thing that just came to mind that was in the news this morning, more lawlessness. We had a meeting between New York's mayor-elect, former police captain Eric Adams, and the founder of the New York chapter of Black Lives Matter, a guy who goes by Hawk Newsom, who received a letter, a warning in the form of a letter from Letitia James last year. Mayor-elect Adams met with Hawk Newsom, who threatened more riots and bloodshed if the police bring back their anti-crime unit. It's interesting to note that in the meeting were other individuals, including this guy who goes by Des Money, who physically assaulted me in Times Square and City Hall Park, and the police have done nothing. So we have, and by the way, Hawk Newsom, the letter that he got from Attorney General Letitia James said that he was illegally fundraising for Black Lives Matter, had not properly registered his charity. So here we've got Eric Adams meeting with putative criminals who are threatening him with more crime if he brings back law enforcement.
This shows you the total breakdown of our legal system, which is corrupt to the core. Yesterday, I was talking with my client and friend, Demetric Penny, who was a very courageous officer in Dallas who was assaulted, and 7 of his brothers were killed in the Dallas massacre several years ago. Demetric brought cases against Louis Farrakhan because his disciple, Farrakhan's disciple, committed those crimes, and Farrakhan had actually given an order to commit them. And Black Lives Matter, and also Sharpton and the rest of them, and Jesse Jackson, he sued them all. And they threatened him. They called him a house N. They called him an Uncle Tom. They threatened to go kill him. The most courageous people in this country are people like Demetric Penny, the Black conservatives. The white people have been cowards up to this point in time. Now they're starting to get a little courage, at least in school boards. But you know, everybody needs to play a role here. And Black people are not to be blamed. Black people are good people. But these radical Blacks, which are being manipulated by the Jewish left by and large, are simply evil. They're evil.
And there were white people in the meeting as well. So it's Marxist anarchists who support this false movement and try to divide us, black and white. And hopefully they will not succeed, Larry. But I want to thank you for another excellent session of the Citizens Grand Jury. I want to thank everybody who's been watching, and we'll be back next week with another Citizens Grand Jury. Have a great day, everybody.